AMD has been around since 1969. It's a $5 billion company and more bigger than that with 10,000 employees. You've been there since May of last year as Chief Marketing Officer, and since then, AMD is going through a huge change and a kind of a branding reinvention. Tell me about what's happening and why.
Sure. So let me tell you a little bit about AMD to start. You know, we are a 44-year-old company, as you mentioned, and I like to say that we're the brains and the beauty behind the devices that you and I use every day. So you think about PCs to the tablet movement, gaming consoles, data center servers, embedded technologies like, you know, automobile, digital signage, et cetera. And the semiconductor industry really is what powers all those devices. AMD has obviously been a big player in that space for a long time. So what we found ourselves in was a real transformation over the past year, and it's ongoing. And you know, AMD last year took a very hard look at where it was as a business and then of course as a brand. And my charter as CMO is to think about how we can continue to drive the strongest possible brand preference for AMD in terms of driving purchase intent, and also to think about how we can drive the cultural shift that is required for a broader business transformation. And so what we decided to do last year and into this year was orchestrate the single largest brand research study and insight study in AMD's history into what buyers thought about AMD, both as an end user brand and as an ingredient brand in the products that you and I buy and that we love the most. And so through that study, we actually uncovered some very interesting insights about perceptions of AMD and perceptions of the space itself. You know, a few of the core findings that we found, Fred, were first of all, both consumers and commercial buyers have very similar feelings about ingredients like AMD. You know, they want to feel that we are providing a more emotional experience to their buying process and less about what we affectionately call in the industry the speeds and feeds, if you will. Those are the product features that you often see marketed for an ingredient brand or a technology brand. And what we learned was that buyers are very interested in the outcomes and the experiences that we drive, more so than the speeds and feeds and the features. We also learned that consumers and commercial buyers are far more aligned than we potentially ever knew. And this has given us permission to think about the AMD brand as a unified brand as opposed to a fragmented brand, which is the way we've traditionally thought about it and marketed in the past towards different pockets of users who potentially have different outcomes and different demographics. What we've learned now is that we can be one brand to those millions of users, whether you are an enthusiast, whether you are a CIO, an IT decision maker, a home user, a gamer, you name it, we can actually be one brand to those audiences. And so those insights were incredibly important to us. And in fact, what we found was that the research for consumers and commercial buyers almost exactly mirrored each other. And in some cases, and this was very interesting, the statements around purchase intent for commercial buyers were even more emotional than those for consumer buyers. So IT decision makers, partners, value-added resellers, they were even looking for a more emotional connection in some ways than the consumers were, as opposed to just being focused on speeds and feeds.
Well, if you find out that your identity and your branding is so tied up with emotions, I would think that would have to change the way everyone within the company thinks about it too, and you'd be fostering a terrific internal cultural shift as well as a change in your outreach and how you connect with everybody else. Is that so, and can you talk about that?
That's absolutely true, and I think it's impossible. I personally believe that it's very difficult to transform a brand on the outside if you don't transform it inside first. So there's a quote that's been around for a few years that marketing is the new HR. And I think it's a very poignant one, particularly when you consider a company going through the level of transformation that AMD is today. So first we started by thinking about who we are, why we exist, what was our purpose, what's the noble cause that AMD was to drive in the world. And we call that our purpose. And we acknowledge that in order to think about a brand framework that would be much more in line with that emotional outcome and bringing our employees along with that, we needed to become a purpose-driven brand. And so today, what you're going to see in the coming months and weeks and well into the future, Fred, is a shift within AMD's culture around becoming more purpose-based and more purpose-driven and thinking more about the people that we serve and the outcomes we drive, as opposed to just being an ingredient brand inside of a system.
It sounds like you're having fun and having a sort of a great time making this big change happen. what has been a particularly big challenge or a big surprise in it all?
You know, first of all, it's very fun. I love my job. I always tell people I have the greatest job in the world. I think that, you know, clearly transforming a 44-year-old company, you know, returning to a different state of growth than what we've been in is very, very difficult for a business. You know, AMD has gone through tremendous turnaround over the past year, and we really are enacting our strategy today. It's something we're very excited about. I think, too, that a lot of companies who haven't taken the time to look at their brand holistically from the inside out find themselves sometimes a little bit lost in terms of who they are. One of the biggest shifts we've had to make is talking about who we are and talking about it in the most inspired way possible. You know, the vast majority of our employees are engineers, and many of them have never been through this type of process. And I think that marketing at many organizations often doesn't involve the employees as much as we should. And so that's been a change for our business. It's a little bit of a surprise some days, but I think the pleasant surprise and the happy surprise for me as CMO is how excited I see our people over it. So that's been really fun.